look in a bit more detail on the candidate data form. Uh, Reminder, there will be future webinars on the executive skills portfolio and on the exam coming up after the turn of the year. Understand that the certification program itself is based on a point system with a maximum of 3 years from the date of your enrollment as a candidate to accumulate points. Basically, that means 3 dates or 3 years in which you can submit a candidate data form and an executive skills portfolio, and up to 3 opportunities to take the exam, depending on which year you qualify to take it. The certification program is based on a point system, and they are objective measures of a candidate's kinds of experience in community action, which is documented in the candidate data form. The skill in doing the work of community action, which is showcased in the executive skills portfolio, and in the annual CCAP exam, which is the opportunity for candidates to demonstrate knowledge about community action. A few more preliminary reflections on the candidate data form. It's a far-reaching and comprehensive method for you as a CCAP candidate to gain recognition by your professional peers of your experience in such things as serving in positions at the level of executive management in your agency or association and in related employment settings. It's your opportunity to document how you prepared to become a community action leader through your formal education and your career updating through management, targeted training, and professional networking. Third, it's an opportunity for you to document how you performed your work in community action in ways that advance the vision and values of community action in the broader community, and importantly, doing this beyond simply fulfilling the duties of your job inside your agency. It's a place for you to document your advocacy work on behalf of communities that the community action programs serve, and your chance for telling the story of the challenges and successes of community action through your use of publications and media, and a place for you to document how you've served on boards and committees that have kept you involved in the life of your community. Much of community action power, of course, is in its ability to respond quickly, strategically, and creatively to the ever-evolving needs of the poor seeking full inclusion in the life of America's community. And that does mean that the best leaders in community action are both nimble and strategic-minded at the same time. But there are many ways community action leaders get to their goals of community service and advocacy that are commonly shared. And here you'll see the CDF form is the Certification Commission's best effort to set up categories that match those shared kinds of experiences. Now, there's a value to this, a special value in having you take some time to think about how your experiences are like those of other leaders in community action. It's worth the effort to find that commonality, to let your peers see how you do the work and advance the mission of community. So the process of completing this candidate data form shouldn't be viewed as a hurdle, but as an opportunity to reflectively, purposely, and intentionally take stock of experiences that formed your professional identity, experiences that keep you focused on being a leader in community action. And it's, as you can see on this slide, based on an honor system. You sign and date the form. It's important to use only the form that's a fillable PDF that is currently on the partnership website. I say that because there are some other forms out there that are being shared by past candidates, now CCAPs, that do not use them. Download the particular form that is currently on the partnership's website. It's a fillable PDF. Now, the next closing date is Wednesday, January 15th. That means if you're currently a CCAP candidate, and if you really want to try to qualify to complete the process 2020, that means that your candidate data form is due on that Wednesday, January 15th. I'll say a little bit more about how that's done in a few minutes specifically. When the CDF is received, a provisional score is provided. That is not a final score. A final score is not determined until an ESP is scored. There are a host of specific technical reasons for that. I don't want to get into the weeds of that. But accordingly, a candidate data form score is never communicated then separately from an ESP score, automatically, that is. But you will be able, as you listen to this webinar and look at the form itself, pretty much to calculate what your own score is. It's not that complicated. It doesn't require a lot of jurying part of evaluators. As we go through the form, which we're going to do in just a couple of minutes, understand that no partial points are given any category, including years of appointment. There's no 2.5 points or 2.75. It's all integers. It is the staff and a bunch of CCAP volunteers that score the candidate data form on all first read. But decisions about what might be an ambiguous entry, whether it qualifies or not, are reserved to the chair of the commission. And to advance, to take the examination, you will need a total score of 700 points, combining the score for your candidate data form and the executive skills portfolio. And CDF, the candidate data form itself, must score a minimum of 300 points. There is no maximum on a candidate data form, number of points that you can achieve, but think about it. Any points that you score over 400 are superfluous because you are required to get 300 points on the executive skills portfolio as a minimum. So anything over 400 on the candidate data form would total over 700 points combined. So just be mindful of that. A candidate may submit additional entries to previously submitted candidate data form at any time. For that end, a separate addendum page is provided with the candidate data form on the website. That page also can sometimes be used if there's not enough space on the form for you to complete all entries in a particular category that the CDF itself provides space for. When you're finished, this is how you communicate it. You send the completed CDF and any of those addendum pages, scan please into one document. Do not send it as separate documents. And when scanned, submit it to ccapcontact@aol.com. That email address was set up back in the early 1990s, and it was decided quite not long after that never to change that. We all know what happened in that work whenever different email addresses are established. So we've kept it, even as archaic as it might be. It is important to note this is different from previous years in Canada. It's no longer necessary to submit copies of publications or manuals that are authored by the candidate. So please, especially in 3.6 and 4.1, as you will see on the form, do not submit them. You might, if an audit is done of your CDF, which is very infrequent, quite infrequent, if that happens, you might be asked to submit them, but that's only in response to a request. Now let's take a look each of the 4 sections of the candidate data form individually. I'm going to walk you through the separate parts of section part 1 of the candidate data form. Then I'll be watching the chat panel to see if you have any questions, and I'll check in with Alexa before we move on then to the next section. Section 1 only has 2 parts to it. The first, an employment, is the number of years as a management or executive staff in a community action agency or in an association. You will notice that here, and as the case as I'm circling, for all of the sections of the candidate data form, you see how many points are provided for each entry. And you also see how many points are the maximum total acceptable in that whole category. It's important to know that because after you've reached that maximum, you cannot obtain more points in the category. So here we see the number of years as a management or executive staff in a community action agency or CAA association. You see there are 5 potential descriptors of the position that qualifies. You have to be able to check yes to any 3 of those 5 for each entry that you place under employment on the candidate data form. So what you see here on the screen under 1.1, that is provided a couple of times on the form so that you can document each of your employment employed positions and employed only, volunteer positions in the agency like being a board member do not count under this category. You'll see that they do elsewhere. But that these are placed here on the candidate data form on 1.1. 1.2 candidate data form is the number of years as a full-time management or executive staff member in an organization other than a community action agency or CAA association. And you'll see that there are fewer points per year. It's 8 points and up to a maximum of 50 points. Now that could be any position in which you have supervisory, managerial, organizational responsibility, including running your own business. It doesn't have to be nonprofit or governmental. It can be in the private sector. And then the third option under section 1 in the candidate data is any internship that you may have had in a community action related organization. Let's say perhaps in your agency you were in school and doing a bachelor's in social work and you had a placement at your agency that eventually hired you, or another agency at CAA, and you were there for your final year of your degree. That would count for that full 1 per month. Okay. The section on employment is pretty clear. We don't usually have questions on it. I'll check to see if there are. I haven't seen any chat box. But I do want to go back to one reflection I should make on 1.2 in full-time management. That's not in the CAA. Sometimes some candidates have claimed full-time positions and, like, say, they're managing a business in the same years that they're claiming full-time management in a community action agency. That is that is always disallowed. And what is disallowed is 1.2 because you get for that. So you cannot claim both 1.1 2 same year. Not seeing any questions in the chat box.
So we do have one question, Jim. Does serving as a civil rights commissioner for Indiana for 8 to 9 years count for section 1.2?
I'm sorry again. What was the position again, Alexa, please?
Civil Rights Commissioner for Indiana.
No, you'll find it. Oh, I see that as a question. Ms. Cranchell, I'll tell you about that is that's if it's not a paid position, it won't count here. If it's not full-time, it won't count here. But if it is a volunteer position of the Civil Rights Commissioner or part-time, there is an opportunity later in the candidate data form to get credit for it, and we'll see that. Okay? Anything else there? Don't see any, okay?
That's it.
Thanks, Alexa. Let's move on to Section 2. And we're going to look at Section 2 through a group of categories. There's 12 of them. Let's look at the first 4. The first is college or graduate degrees. And as you can see on the college or graduate degrees, there's a certain amount that is provided for a specific degree, for an associate's, a bachelor's, or a master's or above, and for a maximum. So, for example, if you have an associate's degree, you can claim both points. But if you have a master's degree or more, that counts for everything. And if you have a bachelor's and a master's, it still can only be 150 points for your master's or your doctorate. 2.2, that's pretty clear. College credits earned in management courses other than those applied to a degree you have completed. Let's say after you did an degree, an associate's in degree, and you wanted to take more courses in accounting at a community college after your degree or after your bachelor's, or you wanted to do a specialization. If you gain credits at an accredited college or university, they count at 3 points per credit, whether that's a semester or a quarter, up to a total of 30 points. But 2.3 is the category for management courses that were completed, but you did not receive college credit. Maybe you audited a course at your community college because you wanted to have the learning experience. Or maybe you went to a course that was provided for something like continuing education units. But notice, while you can gain 5 points per course, that there is a minimum amount of hours that course must have met, and that's 12 hours minimum or more. And for that kind of educational experience, you get a total of 30 points. That means 6 of them at 5 per course. Now, 2.4, specialized community action, national, state, or regional executive training programs. Now, let's take a look at that because that's a rather unique category. During the course of the establishment of the CCAP program, and as the first years of its development, the Commission occasionally received requests from various organizations for special accreditations for training programs that they have provided that are either comprehensive in their coverage of the community action body of knowledge or are specialized in targeted leadership skills for special service to community action. So in response to those requests, the Commission established certain training events that would receive a certain number of points. And over the history of those requests, these following 7 programs in the history of CCAP have been approved. And since there is no expiration date for what you can put in your candidate data form, that is to say your training experience is anything after your high school graduation, for example, any of those kinds of experiences count. There is no expiration date. So if you participated in some of these programs that were approved by the Commission back in the 1990s, they still count. That's, for example, what you see in the first program that's listed which is the Executive Development Institute that was provided by the Missouri Community Action Association. One of the earlier ones also that still is operative is Region 4 Certification Program. The CCAP program still counts. Now, most of these programs, particularly in the beginning, were established with a certain point threshold of 30 points. And some of them after that have been a different number of points. Now, you can see some that have been added over periods of time. For example, the Roma Training Certification Program. This is specifically train the trainers. By the way, that should be capital ROMA, my apologies. And whenever one becomes a national certified Roma trainer or a nationally certified Roma implementer, at that point, either one of those can be acclaimed, that whole training program, for a specific number of points in the candidate data form. You can't claim both of them, just claim one of them. And that is valued at the full 30 points. And by the way, these details are visible in the actual full candidate data form that you will download from the partnership website. I didn't bother to copy all those details on this webinar. It would be just way too word heavy. So Roma Training Certification Program also is one of the programs that has been approved for 30 points. The Partnership Pathways Viewer Training Program is awarded up to 10 points. Completion of the Elite Partnerships Elite Program was for 20 points. Completion of the National Family Development Council's Dr. Claire Forrest's program using the Empowerment Skills for Family Worker course. That specific course, led by an official FDC instructor, is accredited for points also on the candidate data form, the full 30 points. Now, all of these have been programs, as we mentioned, that have been specifically submitted to the commission and approved. If you go back to that previous slide, you can accumulate them up to a total of 90 points, as you can see here. Now, some associations might say, well, I have a program that's very similar. They may potentially be added to the candidate data form. There's a specific process that the commission goes through to accredit those. And some of you may be saying, well, I'm going to a program that's so similar to that. I want those points. It doesn't mean that because you can't get the points for a whole program, you can't claim the specific training sessions that are part of that program, as you will see later on this section of the candidate data form. So let's go there to the other parts of it. And I'll come back to that point of them being, some of these being the places to mark entries in trainings that might have been to programs similar to those that have been recognized and accredited for that.
Jim, can we jump in with a quick question?
Yes.
Someone asked, can you count an associate's and a bachelor's for a total of 140 points, or just
Yes.
100 for the bachelor's?
No, you can accumulate. You can accumulate up to 150. You might have two associates. That's 80 points, for example. So anything that accumulates a degree up to 150, yeah, is acceptable. Okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Now let's look at the next 5 entries in section 1, education. Management seminars completed that were focused specifically on the fundamentals of community action or nonprofit management. So that's a seminar where you get 3 points for every 6 contact hours. But again, that's seminars that are focused specifically on the fundamentals of community action or nonprofit management. They may have been provided by your state association, they might have been provided by governmental agencies, or whoever it was that provided a management seminar focusing on community action or nonprofit management. The 2.6 is attendance at community action-related state, regional, or national association training events. That mostly refers to the training events that you went to when you went to your state's Community Action Association a conference, or you went to the partnership's annual conference, and in that conference there were breakout sessions. And let's say you went over the course of those 3 days of your state conference to 8 breakout sessions of 1 hour's length. You list each of those on your form, up to a total, as you can see, of 30 one-hour events. But again, there is no partial credit. So if that individual breakout session lasted an hour and a half, it's still 1 point for 1 hour. Of course, if it was 2 hours, it's 2 points. Okay? 2.7 is the opportunity to gain credit for participated in workshops that have been provided that were not necessarily focused on the work of community action, but they might have been professional or trade association or business organizations or government agencies, for example, who might be doing a webinar on best practices in transportation initiatives in rural communities, something like that. So it's really on the topic area rather than the specific community action related management focus. So that's accredited at 1 point per every half day of participation, and a half day is operationalized as a minimum of 3 hours. Now let's look back at those 3 and consider that you might have the opportunity in 2.5, for example, if you went to a training program that's more comprehensive, that might be similar to like the elite program, or similar to what was the Executive Development Institute, but is not accredited by the Partnership Center Partnership for full accreditation. You can put those hours in there, but you can't do both. If you participated in the specific program of the Empowerment Skills for Family Worker course of Dr. Claire Forrest in the Family Development Credential, you can't break out the hours in 2.5. Now I see someone in the chat window has asked, was the Family Development Specialist through the National Resource Center for Family Centered Practice in University of Iowa School of Social Work applied? The answer to that question is not yet. We are waiting the commission is waiting to make a determination on that one. It has been looked at, and I don't think that determination has yet been communicated. The question is whether it is comparable to the program that is the FDC credential. So at this point, the answer to that is no. But again, all of those sessions that were done at the University of Iowa School of Social Work can be accredited here. Okay. Let's look at 2, 8, and 9. By the way, 10, 11, and 12 will be similar to that. 2, 8 is attendance at your state association conference. 2.9 is attendance at your regional association conference. For example, the Mid-America Conference in Region 5, or the CCAP Conference in Region 4, for example. And then 2.10 is the Community Action Partnerships Annual Convention. Each of those, you can get 2 points per year just for going. Here's the rationale behind that. You are networking with other community action professionals. So it's considered just by your being there and having conversations and listening in general sessions, after general sessions, to people's reflections on what they learned, just by being at the conference, you're learning something. So there's 2 points per year, back to previous slide, 2 points per year to your attendance in your state association's conference. There's 2 points for your attendance in the regional association's conference. And the same thing is true, as you can see on the next slide, for your participation in the Community Action Partnerships Convention, and in 2.11 at the annual NCAF Legislative Conference. It is only that conference of NCAF, the legislative conference, that's held each March in Washington. 2 points for that. 2.12 is for participation at any other CAA-related state, regional, or national conference. You know, for example, your state might have its own Head Start conference, or if you're going to the National Head Start Conference, those count at 2 points per conference. Okay? That was the only question I saw on the chat board, chat panel, Alexa, in this section. Did you see any others?
Looks like we had one. Hang on 1 second. Let's see. So to clarify, you can count attending the conferences in 2.8 through 2.10 and count the workshops you attend at those conferences in 2.6?
Correct. Yes, it's a different reasoning behind it. You're attending particular breakout sessions to learn about a particular topic. You're at the conference to network. It's the networking that is considered point-worthy in 2 points, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. It's the actual training session in 2.6. Okay?
Okay, and then we had one more question. What about Roma in-service meetings?
If you're talking about Roma in-service for meetings for someone who is a Roma trainer or Roma implementer, there's no category in that that's placed for it. It depends on what occurs in that event. I think when we get into section 3, we might have an opportunity to account for it there. And I think that might be useful to look at that. It's probably in section 3. I think we're going to find a place to list it. Okay, let's go ahead to that. Are there other questions about the section 2? I don't see any in my chat box.
I do see one. Let's see. Oh, it was just another question. Is the Indiana State Housing Conference count?
The State Housing Conference? Yes, of course. Under 212, yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, that's it.
Let's move on to, and another point about that. I want to say something about how a CDF is evaluated. It is understood, that was the reason for that introductory conversation about the candidate data form, that the form is an attempt to set up categories with a hopes to really find something that applies to a host of, innumerable numbers of kinds of experiences that community action professionals have. And it's sometimes hard to figure out where does something fit. The usual advice is if you think it fits, put it there. If you think there's reason for it to be considered for points, put it there. The sensibility of the evaluators is to be inclusive, not exclusive. If the evaluator is confused about whether something should really qualify given that guidance, then it's up to the chair of the commission to make a determination. That's almost never about anything that's other than a few points. Remember, we're talking about an instrument that's going to be hundreds of points, and it might be about 10 points or 5 points here or there. And if there is an ambiguous entry and it gets down to that few number of points, that's why I say a score is not communicated and a certain auditing process begins. If a candidate is at the point of qualifying or maybe not qualifying because of those few points and something is ambiguous, that's when an audit is due to happen. And that's one of the reasons why we don't communicate exact points on the candidate data form. That said, when a candidate data form and an executive skills portfolio combine, and we'll talk more about this when we look at the ESP in a date that's yet to be set in our January webinar, then the candidate is informed of that, and if a candidate gets close to qualifying within 95%, there's a whole other process that's given to a candidate to resubmit some things. I don't want to get into the details of that. It would be way too confusing now. But if you're a candidate and that happens to you, that the number of points is close but doesn't make it, and something is ambiguous, there will be lots of guidance given to a candidate at that point. Okay? Let's move now then to Section 3. And this is involvement in national, regional, state, and local community action activities. And here, the first thing we see in point 1, 2, 3, and 4 is your involvement in communicating and training and informing others. Then 3.5 is your service on peer-reviewed teams. Maybe that's where, and we'll look at 3.5. That might be the place that was an answer to a question about in-service for Roma trainers and implementers. But let's look at 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3.1 is an instructional presentation you did to other community action agencies. Perhaps your state association asked you to present on your agency's very creative approach to communicating advocacy initiatives on behalf of the low-income community in a controversial issue, and that you navigated those difficulties and had a very effective campaign. So they asked you to teach other agencies at the state association. Or maybe you did that same thing and a neighboring community action agency in the counties in the western part, they said, will you come and tell us how you did that? So that's your instructional presentation to other community action agencies. Not on your own. What you do, instruction on your own, comes up in a different way a little later. But maybe, now we'll go to 3.2. It's instructional presentations to non-community action agency organizations on CAA-related matters. So maybe your United Way asked you to say, tell us about how you developed that very creative approach to advocacy in this tight political atmosphere in our community, and how you successfully communicated those difficult messages. Teach us your skills. So that would be you're presenting it to a non-CAA organization. Now let's go down to 3.3 and 3.4. Maybe you're not especially skilled at presenting, but you were part of the team that developed that unique communication strategy. So you are placed on a panel, and the person who is the lead trainer then asks you to talk about your part in that program. That means you're a panelist for that. Or maybe you were the discussion leader of a group of panelists. So you did that same thing for the State Association, 3.3, and you did the same thing for United Way, 3.4. So there you have fewer points as a panelist, but you were part of that activity that communicates the work of community action outside your own agency. You're showing leadership in community action outside your own agency, so that you're gaining credit for that. Now, 3.5 is service on peer review teams or policy development teams, etc. This is the category that is set up for those kinds of activities that you do that are ones where you're involved in the work of community action outside your own agency, and the kind of things that might be covered in this category. For example, say you served on a panel or a commission, like, for example, your State Civil Rights Commission. Or maybe you served on a group to review, though there might be another one for that Civil Rights Commission. We're going to look again later. This is one possible example. Or maybe you are on a panel to review the activities of another community action agency for perhaps giving a summary report about that agency. Maybe it was an evaluation of that community action agency. Or maybe you were asked to be involved in organization of a review. Or maybe you were on a regional conference planning committee for your region or your state association. Or maybe you are involved on a planning group that remember the dialogue on poverty that may have been done in your state. That was especially a valuable tool back in the early part of this century, the 21st century, that is. Or maybe you are involved in community action partnership committees or subcommittees or Roma Implementation Task Force or similar activities. For example, you served as a Pathways Reviewer for the Community Action Partnership, or you served as an Excellence Award Reviewer. All of those kind of activities are available, and you see that you can get quite a substantial number of points for these activities because there's so many possible ones that you could include here. That was the Commission's attempt to include all kinds, and so many different activities that have been listed in this category. It's quite creative and quite demonstrates the ability of community action to respond to need. Okay, so that's in 3.5. So there's lots of ways you might be able to document those activities. Now you'll be asked to point out the date of delivery of any kind of final product or report. You'll be asked what kind of activity it is, a review group or a planning group or implementation group or other. And you'll be asked to indicate the number of hours you participated in that activity. Okay? That's all on the form. Number 3.6 is about publication of articles on community action matters. Again, we're still in the realm of communicating here in 3.6 about community action matters. Now, this is where you're actually doing it by publication of articles. A publication article will include things like your agency's newsletter, maybe letters to the editor, maybe op-ed pieces, maybe brief articles in your neighborhood uh, publication around programs of the Community Action Agency. So it's any kind of article around community action in any publication, except for it doesn't include articles that are written as part of training materials that you use in your agency. There's a separate category for on training materials that we'll look at in section 4. Okay. Let's look then now at number 3.7 and 3.8 and 3.9. These are places for you to document your involvement on boards or commissions. Now, for example, 3.7, that was specifically placed in the candidate data form to recognize those persons who might have been previously on the board of an agency, and then impressed with what the agency does, want to become an employee of an agency. That might mean someone who was, for example, one of the most frequent examples of this is someone who was a representative of the low-income sector, who gained a lot of skills while on the board, seeing the work of community action, and really wanted to get involved, and then eventually became a staff member. That's the most frequent example of this, but not the only one. Okay? So that's number 3.7 is particularly for that. 3.8 is particularly for membership on Community Action Association Board. So if you're on your state's Community Action Association Board. Now that also includes membership on boards that are CAA related, like your Head Start Association. 3.9 is membership on other human service organization boards that are not specific CAA, so that you might be involved on the board of directors of United Way. Or, for example, I was involved on a board in my county that was the Behavioral Health Coalition that made the determination and looked determination about distribution of funds for low-income persons in need of mental health assistance. That's an organization that was human service related, but was not specifically community action involved. Okay, so let's take a look at then the next. Before going to the next, which is section 4, the last section, which is the briefest section of the candidate form. Will take us a few moments. Let me see if there are any questions on section 3. I don't see any in my chat panel. Do you see any?
Nope, I don't have any either.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at section 4. This was the section where the commission placed a lot of things that were hard to place elsewhere. They didn't quite fit. 4.1 is for instruction material. So let's say you were the person who wrote the instruction manual for issues of cultural inclusivity and taking an approach of cultural humility for your frontline staff. Those instruction materials count. Or let's say even if you did an IT manual, that counts. 4.2 is instructional presentations on community action management outside of the community action network. That is to say, let's say that very same manual that you wrote, you wanted to train your human service board of your city on using appropriate training materials for frontline staff that shows cultural humility. You took that instruction material and used it for a training event. Is one example of that. You don't necessarily have to be doing an instruction material. I just gave that as an example of someone using instruction materials. But the point is, it's a presentation on something that is on how you manage in your agency outside of community action. 4.3 is involvement in non-community action-related association. Now, you know what the most common one is for this? 1 year per involvement, school board, church board of trustees, that you're on the St. Joseph's Episcopal Church board of trustees. That's an example of that. And that's 1 per year per involvement. So that covers all of the categories of the candidate data form. I just want to say a few more things about the submission of the candidate data form and some guidance before we close. And the first thing is to take a look at the addendum form. As I mentioned, if you don't have enough space for all the categories you want to enter, and you need to have additional entries on your form, you use the addendum page. And you'll see that on that addendum page, you mark the specific heading, and you'll see the same headings. Let's say that you didn't have enough room to place all of your involvement. That's specifically on number 5, where you fulfill that consultant role. Then you do that here. Subdivision. You describe that particular activity, everything that's required. Now, in addition, let's say your candidate data form that you submit this year, and you need to add to reach the qualifying level. You don't submit a whole candidate data form the next year. You just submit a group of these addendum pages, one of those for each of these sections of the candidate data form that you need to make that entry, and then you give in all the details. Submit it as a document attached to a message in 2021 to add to your post. That's why the addendum form is placed on the website, so that you don't have to reproduce a whole candidate data form. You will also find on the website a guide to understanding the candidate data form. That is a guide that's meant to help you understand the purpose of the candidate data form. It provides a broad overview. It doesn't provide all the necessary explanatory details for each section of the CDF itself, but when you've grasped that general intent and purpose by listening to this webinar and then reading that guidance document, and you get the feel of what the candidate data form is for, then when you go and look at the form itself, you'll see guidance as you download the form section by section that will help you complete the form. So that should be sufficient when you get it. Disregard these dates that you see for the future webinars. We're renegotiating those dates for the 2020 webinars. Stay tuned. or when those dates will be. That'll happen very soon. Okay? So, some helpful reminders. Your candidacy lasts for 3 years. About half of candidates do it in the first year. Many require the full 3 years for a host of reasons, because they might not have the time in a particular year because of their responsibilities to fulfill all their requirements, even though they had hoped to or planned to. And you saw some examples of how the program has opportunities for people who've come up through the ranks to build a candidate data form. You can choose a CCAP pathway mentor to work with you. The CCAP page on the partnership website that's being updated right now that lists those 50 or more mentors who can help you with your candidacy. And all the forms that you need on the web page are available through that you need for your CCAP are available on the CCAP page of the partnership website. When you get to the actual CCAP page, you'll see this screenshot here of the where the forms will be located. There's going to be a little bit of updating of that happening pretty soon, but you'll find all those forms available. But you will find right now the current candidate data form, and you will find the current guidance document right here on candidate data form under that down menu. It's right there right now, the forms that you need right now to complete your candidate data form. Well, I think we just made it at about 2 minutes before the expected close of this webinar. If you did not find your questions answered, then please make sure that you send an email message to me. And here you see that email address, ccapcontact@aol.com. I will be ready to answer your messages to the best of my ability. I can't give you specific information about content that your mentor should do, but I can give you specific information about the process. Okay, that is what we have to share with you today. Do we have any final questions from any of our attendees that we haven't asked yet, haven't answered yet, Alexa?
I don't see any questions. I think we're good.
Okay, then I want to say thank you to everyone to participate. My responsibility is to be available to you to answer your questions, and I return it to Alexa to let them know about any recordings.
All right, thanks, Jim. So thank you all so much for listening to our webinar today, and we'll send an email following up with you in the next couple days when that recording is ready. And as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call at the office, and we hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.